I'm Rashonda. I'm the founder of artbyrow.com, where you can find over 200 art and drawing tutorials. My goal is to help 1 million aspiring artists learn to love their artwork. If this sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos. Now let's head on over to the studio and get ready to create some art. Hi, welcome to the Art by Row studio. So today we're going to talk about how to draw skulls. And there are so many different ways that you can draw them, different styles. You can make them realistic, cartoon. You can do the eye shape so many different ways. You can do the lower jaw, leave the lower jaw off. But the basic principles are the same, and the elements are basically the same. And what I mean by elements, your skulls are going to have a nose, eyes, the shape of the head's going to be fairly similar. You have the cheekbones, you have the teeth, the jaw. You can draw each of those in a different way, or you can leave them out like the teeth or the jaws. Not all skulls have the lower jaw, and not all skulls have all of the teeth. So the first thing I want to talk about is the basic structure of the skull itself. So you have, if you break things down into basic shapes, which makes things really easy, you have the round shape of the head. This is your basic head shape. And then you have where your jawline goes. So if we're breaking this down into basic shapes, you can have a circle with an overlapping square rectangle shape, and then you can quarter that circle to show the line of symmetry, and then roughly where the eyes are going to go. And this is just the guideline. You can change it as you go. That's why we draw in pencil first, so that any changes you want to make, you can make. So we have this all laid out. The eyes are going to go here. Your nose will go here. And then the mouth will go down here. This creates the jawline and the top of the head. So after you have your shapes all drawn out, you have some idea of where everything's going to go, you can start drawing your details in. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. You can change how you do the nose, the shape of the eyes. You can take this basic rough sketch and make so many different drawings from it just by starting here. So the first thing I like to do, I like to start with the nose because it's the central point, and then it gives me somewhere to work around it. So what you want to do is draw out the actual shape of your nose using that little rough shape, the little basic shape that you drew in is your guidelines. And if you bring up some drawings of skulls or pictures of actual skulls on the internet, you can get some different ideas for the shapes of the nose. And I'm not trying to draw this super realistic, so I'm not going to worry about all the extra details inside. This will just be filled in black. And then after the nose, you can do the shape of the eyes. And there's a lot of different ways to draw the eyes. You can make it look a little bit more fierce. You can make it look more cute or cartoony. You can make it more realistic. Anytime when you're drawing eyes, if you make them slanted instead of straight across, it'll make them look a little more intimidating, a little fiercer, less cute. Anytime you use more rounded circular shapes, it'll make them look a little more cute. So depending on what you want the overall look of your skull to be, those are some things you can take into consideration. I don't want mine to look super cute, but I'm also not too worried about trying to make it look intimidating or scary. Another thing when drawing the eyes, you can put eyeballs inside of them. I mean, obviously skulls typically aren't going to have eyeballs, but that's something you could add if you wanted to. You can see, if you go online, different variations of the eyes, ones that have eyeballs in them, ones that don't. A lot of times you'll see just one eyeball and the other one just has the eye socket. And just keep working the shape until you come up with something that you like. Normally the inside part of the eye, where it's closest to the nose, will be thinner than this outside edge. And you want your eyes to be symmetrical, which means they should look the same, like a mirror image. If you folded it in half, everything should line up. They don't have to be exact. And that's one of the things, I talk a lot about learning to love your art. And one of the things that goes along with learning to love your art is to let go of the idea of perfectionism and just letting it be what it is. And if you're trying to make your drawings look symmetrical and they're not perfect, don't stress out about it. Many things in life that we think are perfect and symmetrical, they really aren't. So the human face, generally speaking, is symmetrical. But if you really look at a person's face and you look at their eyes, they're not completely symmetrical. At first glance, they might appear that way and it might seem to be perfect, but in most cases, it's actually not. But you want to give the overall appearance of your drawings being symmetrical. So if you want, you can add eyeballs or one eyeball or however you want to do it. You can have it fill up the whole eye socket. You can have it just at the top. This is just a personal preference. You could put one in there, you could put two in there. It just depends on the look you're going for. So the next thing is we got the nose, the eyes. Now we want to start drawing in the cheekbones. And the mouth is going to be somewhere down in here. We have this line to indicate roughly where it's at. And you can draw your teeth straight across or curved. Again, either way is fine, and whichever way you choose to do it will change your overall look of your drawing a little bit. So if I know I want my teeth to start down here, then I know I need my cheekbones are gonna end where the teeth are. And then the teeth are going to be down here and the jaw is going to continue down this way. You can start from next to the eye and start by drawing lightly at first, and then we can go back in and add more specific details. Again, you want them to be fairly symmetrical. They don't have to be perfect. And you can make these cheekbones, you can make them bigger, you can make them smaller. They can stick out more, they can stick out less. You can make them rounded or with a little bit of points on them. And everything that you do, all these decisions that you make, will change the final look of your drawings, whether it's a skull or anything else. There's a lot of different decisions that can be made while doing our drawings, and it will change what the overall look is, which is a good thing, even though you have a lot of options and sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming or intimidating. But the good thing is you could do the same basic drawing, make a couple of changes, and have a completely different look to it. And that's something that I like to do. I've been doing it for several years now. And I encourage all my students to do the same thing, is to do a series of drawings and to keep changing them. It helps with your creativity. It helps with your overall drawing skills. And it's an easy way to come up with several different drawings. Okay, so I got the cheekbones in. They're not exactly the same. This one I brought the line down here a little bit. This one I didn't. Those are the different types of things you can do to add some variation. So now I want to do the teeth. And I want this space to be a little bit bigger down here. So I'm going to erase this line. And that's going to be the top of my teeth. So a lot of times if you want to make both sets of teeth, you can add in a couple guidelines to help keep everything even. Guidelines are always a good idea. They're very helpful. They give you something to work from. So I'm just making a couple sets of lines here for the top row of teeth, the bottom row. And again, there's a lot of different ways that you can draw the teeth, or you can leave the teeth out altogether. Typically what you want is the top to be curved and the bottom to be more straight across. And as your teeth go to the outside, typically they're going to get a little bit smaller. Your front teeth are bigger than the ones in the back. And I'm not going to worry about how many teeth I'm drawing. I'm not doing a realistic illustration, so it really doesn't matter. If that's important to you, then you can do your teeth more accurate. Most of the time when you're doing your drawings, you're more or less just doing a symbol of something. You're not trying to illustrate precisely whatever it is. I'm not trying to make a realistic, anatomically correct skull. I just want something that you look at it and yep, it's a skull. And a lot of times going outside of what's right makes the drawings a little bit more interesting to look at anyway. If you look at the skulls that are out there, there's a lot of different ones that are more whimsical, cartoony looking, and to me those are more fun and a little more interesting. So when I did the bottom row, I did kind of the same thing as the top. I made them a little thinner down here. They can line up or not line up. It doesn't really matter. The teeth are kind of not so much a focal point, I don't think. So they're just there, but they don't really draw a lot of attention. So after you get your teeth drawn in, now we need to make the bottom jawline. And there's, again, a lot of different ways you can do this. So we're going to start by bringing a line down here. And this is going to be just filled in. That's an opening. Do the same thing on the other side. That's going to be just filled in black. And then this bone sort of follows that line. And something you can do is, again, kind of make an indication of where you want your jaw to end. You can make this space bigger, smaller. You can make it rounded. You could make it with more squared edges. Sometimes it's easier to draw that line first so you know where you're going. You can make this a lot of different types of shapes. Just do whatever you think looks good. This line you can bring out and then curve it in to meet your jaw. Or you can make that more of a rounded edge. You can make it come out even more than this. Again, so many different options that you have. Just do whatever you think looks good. You can experiment, play around with it a little bit, see what you like, what you don't like. So there's the basic shapes of the bottom part. Now we need to draw the top of the skull. And touch up any of these lines, make sure they're the way we want them. So the top of the skull is just going to be a circular shape. Again, a lot of different ways you can make it. You can have it look broken, you can have it look cracked. You want your top of the skull to come down from, or to start from where your cheekbones are. And it's probably a good idea to draw it in real light at first, because sometimes it can be a little challenging to get that shape just right to where it looks the way you want it to look. Turn your paper if you need to. The top of the skull, I think, can look a little boring if you don't add in any type of cracks or anything like that. To me, it's not that interesting. You could put hats on your skulls. A lot of different things you can do with it. Often you'll see sort of down either the center or near the center. You might have kind of a crack coming down here. Maybe have it broken open up at the top. That can make it look a little bit more interesting. Typically, skulls are going to be a little bit beaten up anyway. They're most likely not going to be perfect. So there's the basic drawing of a skull. There's a lot of different things you can do with it. And in this next clip, we are going to look at how to do a drawing that includes some skulls, and I think we'll do a graffiti drawing. We'll have some fun with that. So I will see you in a little bit. Okay, so you got your skull drawing, and the next thing is, what do we do from here? Being able to draw a skull, that's fun, that's pretty cool, but you need to be able to do something with your artwork once you get the basic steps and processes down to drawing something. Originally, I was thinking we could do a graffiti drawing, and we will, but I think that's getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I wanted to take a step back and talk about ways that you can practice drawing something. So in this case, we're talking about skulls, and I've mentioned throughout the entire video that there's a lot of different ways you can draw them and a lot of variations. So what I like to do, and I've been doing this for several years now, and it's worked out really well, and I've seen some really, really good benefits from it, is to do what I call a 7-day drawing challenge. And what this is you pick a subject. So for this example, it would be a skull. And you do 7 skull drawings over the next 7 days, and you try to make each one different. You can make them slightly different. You can make them completely different. That's entirely up to you. And the 7 days, that's just kind of a guideline. You can do it. Sometimes it takes me 10 days. Sometimes it takes a month. It just depends on how busy I am. But the idea is to do a series of the same thing. So for skulls, I did 7 of them. And I tried to do them completely different with different styles. And I do mine on artist trading cards because they save me a lot of time. I can put them in a binder, which then acts as sort of a portfolio of my artwork. And as you can see, each one's got a different style, a different feel to it. But doing this type of challenge is a really, really good way to practice your drawings. Practice, like in this case, I use markers on all of them. So it gives me some opportunities to try some different things with markers and colors. And it's a good way to push your creativity. So before we jump into something like doing a graffiti drawing with a full work of art, let's talk about how to practice some of these different things beforehand to get warmed up, to get some ideas flowing, to get your creativity going. And I think this is a really good way to do it. And this is the method I use for everything before I do any type of big work of art, or if I just want to practice something or work on my creativity. Doing these series of drawings on artist trading cards is a really, really good way. So let's dive into that first. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is get your supplies together. I got my drawing pencil, an eraser, my outlining marker, and then I have my blank artist trading cards. So whenever I'm doing a series of drawings and doing that, what I call the 7-day challenge, I always have a stack of pre-cut artist trading cards. And you can have them from white cardstock, and you want something a little bit thicker. You don't want just plain paper. Cardstock works really well. You can have white. They also come in a lot of different tone papers that are fun to work on. And I typically use markers. And you can use the markers on the different tones of brown. And it makes them look a little bit different than if you do the colors on white, because they're somewhat transparent. So the paper will show through. But it gives a little bit different look to it and style. So that can be a lot of fun doing your drawings on tone paper. If you've never done it, you should give it a try. It's kind of fun. It can be a different style altogether just by doing it on some tone paper. So I have my artist trading card. I have my blotter paper, or whatever you want to call this, behind it so that I don't get any of my drawing on the table. Or if I want to test out a color, that's what all these colors are from. A lot of them were from testing it out. But mostly it's just to keep it from bleeding through onto the table, or when I go up to the edges from getting the marker on the table. So the first thing we want to do, we got everything all set up. We got our supplies. We want to lay out our basic shape, just like we did for the first skull that we drew. And this helps us, for one thing, you get over that syndrome of blank paper. It's called the blank paper syndrome, which basically just means you're intimidated by the blank paper and you can't seem to get that first mark down. So what I'm doing is just real rough sketching out where I want the position of the skull to be on my paper. And I'm doing the same shapes like I did before. I have the circle for the head and then the rectangle shape for where the mouth and jaw area is going to go. But this time I want to do something a little bit different. I'm still starting with my basic shape. I'm still using the same process, but this time I want to do a little less realistic, kind of a cartoon sort of feel to it. And I know one of the things I want to do is simplify the eyes. So I'm going to angle them just because I think it looks a little bit better. And because I want it to be more of a cartoon feel, I'm not going to make the eyes as symmetrical as I normally would. I'm going to make one eye bigger than the other. The nose, I'm just going to use the basic skull type shape of the nose, but with a little bit more rounded edges. So it's a little softer looking, I'm going for more of a cartoon style. Next is going to be the jaw lines again. And I'm keeping my lines fairly simple because I do want it to look a little bit more of a cartoon style. I'm going to clean this up a little bit so you can see it better. So we're still following the same process as we did earlier in the original skull drawing. Same concepts, but changing it up a little bit. And if you want to try doing the 7-day challenge, you would just keep doing this and trying different things. The teeth are definitely not anywhere near, The teeth are not realistic at all. Really exaggerated, making them long. There's only 4 of them, but they still read as teeth. So a lot of what we draw are more or less just symbols representing something. I am having trouble talking today, goodness. We're drawing things to symbolize something. Unless you're doing illustrative type drawing and you want it to be super detailed and realistic, the only goal is for somebody to know what your drawing is. So if I'm drawing a skull, it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be realistic, but I do want it to look like a skull. I want you to look at my drawing and know that this is a drawing of a skull. However far you can push the limits on that, I think the better, because it makes your drawings more unique, it makes them more interesting, and to me that's a lot more fun than just drawing realistic artwork. Back years ago, I used to aim for realism, and then somebody pointed out to me how ridiculous that was, because if you want it to look real, take a photo. And that kind of stuck with me throughout the years. And recently, I've really been having a lot more fun with my art and getting away from perfectionism and judging and all those sorts of things, and just really enjoying it and having fun, because that's what art is really about. It's about the relaxation and the enjoyment you get from it. So letting go of perfectionism will really go a long way in helping with that. So the next thing I want to do, because I know I'm going to be using markers, is to outline my artwork. You can use a thicker marker to do that. I prefer using an outlining pen because something about it feels really relaxing to me. So I tend to just use an outliner. If I want my lines to be thicker, I'll go over them a couple different times and just thicken it up a little bit. And all you're doing for the outline is just going over top of your pencils. Anywhere where you want to keep your lines, you go over it with your black marker. Brush markers work really well. You can get some really, really good line variations. I used to use brush markers pretty much as my go-to for outlining years ago. It does take a little bit of practice getting used to how to use them and knowing where to apply more pressure to get a thicker line, you have to know what you're doing right with that first line as soon as you lay that line down. Where if you're going over it with a thinner marker and darkening areas up, you can make those decisions a little bit at a time. It gives you a little bit more of an opportunity to think about what you're doing, opposed to when you're using a brush marker, you need to know what lines are going to be thicker as you're doing your outlining. So like right now, I can go back in and darken up different areas if I want to. One thing you could do is just do the entire outside edge thicker than everything else. Or you could do just your bottom edges thicker than the rest of it. Your outline is another way to add some variation to your drawings. Just by outlining it differently, you could use a color other than black. For a skull, you could maybe use a brown or gray or orange or pretty much anything. So that's it for the outline. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Just go over your pencil lines. The next thing you want to do is take an eraser, whether it's a pink pearl eraser or I have this black eraser that came with some other art supplies, I think. I don't even know where it came from. I'm sure you've collected tons of art supplies over the years. But I've had this laying around and I tried using it one time and I actually ended up liking it. It's a bit messy, but that's a good thing when it comes to markers because it cleans the marker up as you're using it and you don't get those smudges transferring back onto your drawing like with some of the other erasers. After you erase your pencil lines, you may want to go back in and darken up some areas, or if you see some gaps in the line work, go back in and fill them up. Sometimes it looks like you outlined it, but it ended up just being pencil, and when you erase it, it'll leave kind of a gap in there. And then just kind of look your drawing over, see if you want to darken anything up, make any lines thicker. I added these little eyebrow lines. Obviously, skulls don't have eyebrows, but since that was a cartoon style, it works out okay. So that's it for the drawing and the outline. The next step is going to be to add some color with markers. I'm going to grab some markers to work with, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I got some markers together to use. But as I'm looking at this, I decided I want to add some shading. And I'm going to do this with the outlining pen. It breaks up all that white area a little bit. Makes it look a little more sort of like a comic book type drawing. It has a little bit of that sort of feel to it. This is optional. You don't have to add any type of shading, but you can. I think it looks better with some shading. I'm not going to add a ton to it, but I want to break up that white area a little bit. To me, it feels like there's just too much white on the skull. You can do this step or don't. That's up to you. It all depends on what your style is. And everybody's style is going to be a little bit different. And your style will develop by practicing, trying different things, experimenting, looking at other people's art and seeing what sort of things you like and don't like. Your style, your artistic style, it's going to develop through practice and repetition. So for the eyes, I'm using gray. You can use black, you could use red. You could put some eyeballs in there if you want to. Whatever you want to do, you could use that yellow-green color that looks really good on a lot of drawings. When you're using your markers, it's a good idea to use 2 or 3 colors everywhere. You don't want your drawings to look boring and flat. And that's avoided by using more than one color and filling everything in just a solid gray or black or something like that. It makes it look a little bit more interesting. So the next thing I'm going to do is add some, like a real light beige color. And sometimes the outlining pens will smear. And sometimes it's a big deal and sometimes it's not. Even when they say they're permanent, they still tend to smear, and I'm guessing because they're permanent or waterproof against water, not alcohol. And the markers have alcohol in them as the solvent. And this one's smearing quite a bit. No big deal, we'll fix it as we go. One of the things you want to learn how to do with your artwork is to fix any type of mistakes that come about. Typically, these outliners don't smear this bad. This is the same one I use for quite a bit of my drawings. I've been using it for a while now, and I've never had it smear this bad. Not sure what's going on with that today, but that's all right. We're going to keep working on it. It actually doesn't look terrible for this drawing because we do want some different blemishes and have our skull look a little bit beat up. So I actually don't mind it too much on here. So the next thing I want to do is take a little bit darker color. And what I did to pick out my colors is I use a scrap piece of paper. And these are left over from when I cut out my artist trading cards. And you can just test out your colors, see how they blend together. You want to use the alcohol markers because they will blend. You can go back over top of them and make these lines smoother, the transition smoother, and your colors will be less harsh on the edges. You'll have a smoother gradation, a little bit of a transition. Typically, you want to use at least 2 markers. You can use 3. You can use more than that if you want. I think you should avoid using just one solid color for everything. It'll make your drawings look kind of boring. And when choosing your markers, you do want to find colors that are fairly close together so that they'll blend a little bit smoother. And all I'm doing is adding in some darker areas. I got this yellow-orange color. It's kind of a golden color. Looks pretty good with the beige. In the areas that I'm choosing to add some darker color to is somewhat arbitrary, but I want to be consistent at the same time. So I know there's going to be darker areas underneath the bridge of the eyes where I have these kind of this eyebrow sort of thing going on. I know that's going to be a little bit darker. Obviously, the areas where I've added some shading, I want those areas to be darker. And I'm really just trying to break up all this light color and create a little bit of depth. And you can do this with any color you want. I thought this light beige color looks a little bit like bone, like weathered bone. So I went with this one. You could use white and then just add in your shading with some other grays. There's a lot of different gray markers you can use. And all I'm doing is going back over where I put the darker color on, and I'm using my lightest color and going back over top of it and blending it out a little bit. Another thing you could do is use just a light gray color. And add some darker areas that way. The colors you choose are really going to depend on what your style is and the look you're going for. If you're not sure what that is, or you don't really know what you're trying to do, just have fun and experiment with it. That's why I love doing my drawings on artist trading cards. The cardstock's really cheap. I can cut 10 cards out of one piece of cardstock. And, you know, if I wasn't talking while I'm working, this drawing wouldn't take very long at all. I could have it done in probably less than 20 minutes. Maybe a half hour at the most. And if my goal is to do like maybe one a day, I could do that fairly quickly. It wouldn't take that much time. So that's it for the skull itself. You can see where, for whatever reason, this outlining pen decided it wanted to smear an awful lot today. And things happen. For this particular drawing, I kind of like how it looks. Even though it was unintentional, it's got kind of like a smoky texture to it, which is kind of cool looking. So it doesn't ruin the drawing, in my opinion. Sometimes things just happen. You either go with it or you trash it and start over. I didn't choose to start over today, and it actually worked out kind of nicely. So that makes me think that maybe the next thing I should do is add a background. And I was undecided on what I wanted to do for my background, but now with this kind of smoky effect going on in the placement of the skull, I think some flames down here would look pretty cool. So I'm going to pause for a minute, grab some other markers to use for my background, and I will be back with you guys in just a minute. Okay, so I went ahead and drew in the flames real quick off camera just to save some time, and this video is about drawing skulls with markers, not so much about drawing flames. So all that's left to do is to finish up the background, and I'm going to use this lime green color to fill in the background because I think it's a really cool looking color. One thing I should mention, since this is a video about using markers, is that your preference for markers is going to be up to you and whatever you like using. I have a lot of different markers. I have some of these Shinhan touch markers. I have some Sharpies. I have some Prismacolor. I have some Bic markers. I have a lot of different markers. You can mix and match them. The reason I have so many different brands is because I like to try different ones and see which ones I like, which ones work good, what I like about them, what I don't like about them. I don't care too much for Sharpie markers, only because they have a very strong odor and I'm sensitive to smells. They give me a headache. Some of the other markers are a little gentler when it comes to that. Like this marker that I'm using here, there's no odor to it at all. The big markers don't really have much of an odor. The Prismacolor have a slight odor to them, but it's not anything that's too strong. It's not something that bothers me, but for whatever reason, the Sharpies have a really strong odor, and I don't care for that. For that reason, I typically don't use them. However, I did it one time. They were probably what I started with when I first started using markers years ago, because they're available anywhere. You can go to, even the local grocery store has Sharpie markers. So I use this green color. Now I'm going to go in with a darker color just to break it up a little bit. One of the things I do pretty regularly is just to outline whatever my main drawing is, whatever the main focal point is of my artwork. And I'll just add this halo of color around it. It breaks up the background a little bit. It makes the drawing stand out a little bit. Now these two green colors, I know from past experience that they will blend together. They're pretty different in value. There's a pretty good contrast between them. So it takes a little bit more effort to get them to blend together. And what I mean by that is you might have to go over it quite a few times to get them to blend together, but they will blend. But for this particular drawing, I don't know if I am going to blend them. I might around the flames down here. Adding this little halo color around the flames isn't something I would typically do. But for this drawing, I decided to try it and see what it looks like. Again, what I want to encourage you to do is to try new things, experiment. Don't be afraid of failure. If you're afraid to fail, then you're going to be afraid to take chances and to try new things, and then you're always going to feel uninspired and stuck when you're working on your artwork. By getting brave, trying new things, experimenting, not being afraid to fail, or not even thinking of anything as a failure. So if you want to soften up the edges, take your lighter color, go back over top of it like we did earlier with the skull. Soften up the edges a little bit so it blends together. As you can see, this doesn't really blend in a really smooth transition. But what I found with these markers is that if I use the broader side and go back over top of it, if I keep doing it, eventually I can get those colors to blend together. The reason I don't use a different marker in between is because I don't have a green that's in between these two colors, which is what ideally is what I would really need to do. is I should have another color in between these two, but I don't have that. So you make do with what you have. Someday I'll get some more markers, but I have so many right now, I really just want to use up the ones I already have. So that's pretty much it for this drawing. Let me zoom out just a little bit here so you can see it better. The last thing I want to mention is that one thing you can do is use either a white jelly roll